Everybody, it's great to see you here. We'll talk about standardizing our country's API ecosystem. We will, after a brief presentation of the Italian digital team, which is a 40 people task force of the Italian government for digitalization, we will introduce briefly the new framework, Italian framework that is ongoing. It's still not released, but well, it's on GitHub if you're interested. We'll speak about standardization and reliability. Then, after a brief introduction to all the OpenAPI description language, we will see how you can use an OpenAPI framework connection that is written in Python to create quickly a vast set of API that you can use to mock and prototype APIs and check if the framework is safe to be implemented by other entities. So when you write guidelines and rules, you have the opportunity to check if they match what developers will have to do in their real life. So I work in the Italian digital team mission team. Our mission is to make public services for citizen and business accessible in an easy way through mobile, with a mobile-first approach, using a reliable and scalable architecture, and everything should be defined on APIs. I am Roberto Polli. Many of you already know me. I'm a proud member of the Italian Python community. I have got some infrastructure certification, and I work on the API ecosystem at Digitale. So, the main step that we want to take further in the Italian asset is to switch from an enterprise architecture to a web distributed semantic-based architecture. This is not easy. Actually, in Italy, there is still a SOAP-based framework that works from 30 years. It delivered a great value to the country, but now it's not. It became a bottleneck for the creation of new services because it's complex, it's costly, and we want to enable the creation of new services for citizens, lowering the setup and maintenance costs, simplify the communication with non-governmental agencies, because if the public framework is too costly to be implemented, when we have to communicate with the private sector will have to sustain a set of costs that will shift on the public procurement. And we want to avoid this. We want to have standards that are good for both public and private sector. This fosters interoperability, lowers the cost for the public administration, and hopefully will be a good base for starting interoperability framework that is good for not only for Italy but for the European Union and possibly abroad. Well, one of the main difficulties speaking with public administration is that they are service-oriented. Not service in the sense of web service, but a service in the sense of a process. Everything is about processes because laws is about processes and bureaucracy is about processes. We instead, we are trying to make the public administration aware that citizen services are usually about data and resources. And this tends to map nicely with the REST approach. This doesn't mean that REST is something, one thing fits all magic, but that usually when there is citizen data, in many use cases, in many life events, this fits nicely REST web services. We are not dropping out SOAP. SOAP has still many use cases. We hope to cover even more use cases with REST. But this is ongoing work, and if you're interested, you can follow us on our channels on Twitter. There is a developer Slack channel with roughly 2,000 people on it. It's very interesting. When we speak about REST, we speak about REST without Richardson maturity model, so we don't put, for now, constraints about, are you doing everything on resources, strictly resources? No. Action, URLs? No. Let's start simple. So, the CAST, an API ecosystem for Italy, standardized HTTP APIs for 20,000 governmental agencies or municipalities and 60 million people. It's not easy. As many agencies already started doing REST, we wanted that this was API first, contracts first. So starting governing the ongoing REST processes that was already there. Then a scheme standardization based on national European industry standards. We'll see something about that in a few minutes. An availability strategy. This was very important. We started with a simple solution based on two patterns: a distributed circuit breaker approach and throttling patterns. And last, but this is really work in progress because there are a lot of government and issues, well, not government, governance issues, a national IP catalog, because you have to find a way to preserve the independence of municipalities, regions, and so on, the technical rules that should be horizontal for every kind of agency, and the role of ministries and of central agencies. But we are working on it. So what you see here is selected APIs that you can find online on the developers, our developers portal. It's just the first step. We have some agencies that agreed to bring their APIs in OpenAPI v3. We are starting with some of them and with some others to add metadata on that. We started with 6 APIs, and then we are adding. Surely we have to wait that and ask for agencies to be onboarded, but the problem is that before onboarding we are going to make some compliancy. For example, do you have a clearly defined terms of service for your API? Do you have all the metadata we need? And so this is a starting point to enable processes, compliance processes for APIs. It's not just getting APIs and add it to a catalog. So how do we do it? Well, we could have used the old approach. So just write the rules we think are correct and put them on, and we would have handed in a very few time. Instead, we believe in discussion. So while writing the rules, we confronted with Italian and European agency. In Europe, we have found that the GovUK government digital system was very interested in talking with us. And then there was the joint venture of Finland and Estonia digital services that we engaged, and we are working with them on a lot of issues, and then with the Netherlands. So we are trying to make some rules that sounds good even to other European countries. And that is because we aim at have a common set of rules that are industry standards and that are widely agreed, not only in Italy, but even in the European Union. We have interesting work with some regions on finding metadata to be added to the APIs. We are working with the European Commission on draft works on APIs because actually there is this European Union strategy on APIs is just begun, and we are contributing to the preliminary studies, and then we will follow creating, as I said before, draft standards inside the European Union. And another goal is to bring this work into the IETF and W3C, because we believe that there could be no national standards on API, security, and methods like that. Standards should be widely adopted, widely agreed, widely developed, tested, and implemented. So we want to bring all those in international boards. So we can have feedback from Cloudflare's, Google's, and all those people that maintains a lot of blocks of the internet infrastructure in a way that our security standards and infrastructural standard tends to reach that kind of level to ensure very good quality standards. And another thing we are doing now, thanks to the Google Summer of Code 2, is support the implementation of our guidelines in open source community and software vendor, for example, in API gateways. We want to that API gateways support natively our guidelines on something we already achieved, on something there is an ongoing work, but we believe that it's the right way to do stuff. Which is the future ecosystem? The future ecosystem is the one where every agency provides APIs that could be meshed up to produce different services for citizens. So, for example, a future use case could be the one where I get my son allergy certification from the hospital. I have a way to communicate it safely to the school, so my kid can have an eating menu that fits with his allergy profile, and then I communicate my income information to the town, so I feed the right payment. So I pay the eating of my kid depending on my income. So it's a mashup that it's related to my town hall, because in Italy it's the town, it's the municipality that provides for school lunch services. Is the IRS, that is a Ministry of Finance, that provides my income information. There is the hospital or the PHR, that is in Italy FSRE, that provides my health, me and my family health record. It's a complex task. Many blocks are already there. With the Italian digital team, we are providing a mobile application that can do something like that with the agencies that ask to be integrated in this kind of logic. But this doesn't inhibit that some other agencies could provide a mashup for their own citizen. So, ongoing work on standardization and reliability. Only HTTPS. For now, no HTTP, no binary message, no Kafka stuff. You should expose HTTP API. Why? because you can leverage status, method, and path for auditing and routing, because you can use OpenAPI, you can use OpenID Connect and OAuth for profiling. If you just use Expose Kafka, you can do it. So, ontology-based schema. We have an Italian ontology, there are European ontologies, that is modeling data stuff. For example, on the left, you have all the possible way you can find the tax code on GitHub. All on the left, you have always implemented APIs or services. We have two levels. The one you see here is the English one. For example, if you have to implement a cross-border service or cross-border API, another one is in Italian. In this way, you shouldn't care about modeling conversion between different way of naming the same entity. It seems easy, but it will bring in a very few times a lot of advantages. Log dates. Okay, RFC 3339, possibly with Zulu time, and Unix timestamp is allowed to. All you have on the left will be forbidden. Service management. Okay, if your service, if your organization 2 and your service is not available, you should tell me. And you should tell me with an HTTP header that tells me when I should retry. Otherwise, what happens now and what usually happens in the world is that I get stuck until I get a connection timeout. This is not sustainable, but if you do this, you can have scalable services, because I can know how to manage the user experience. If I am organization 1, I know how to manage user experience, knowing that you will be able in 5 minutes, for example, because you may be saturated or unavailable. So, service management headers. Every API gateway provides its own. You have 1,000 requests a minute, but you should check, depending on the headers, my API gateways replies to you, how to manage this. Okay, this doesn't work, because if client service should guess that the same API with different API gateways has different throttling headers, they will end in not implementing them, because people is lazy. So, 3 rate limit headers with a very simple semantics. You could add other headers, but you should always expose those 3. Better a bit of errors or imprecision that no throttling headers or unused throttling headers at all. And you have to communicate service status. HTTP 503, the service is unavailable. It could be broken. It could be outside service hours. For example, there are financial services that just work on Forex hours. So you can make an API request at 1 a.m. You get service unavailable, but okay, service unavailable because you should retry in 7 hours, not because the service is down. And if you do too many requests, you should retry after sometimes. And I have to tell you the time interval in seconds. Okay? So if your clock is skewed, it will work anyway. We are working with open source API gateways to implement compliance. Actually, almost all API gateways implement correctly now, retry after. Some API gateways implements all the 3 service limits. For someone, we provide a patch. And okay, errors, RFC 7807 states how you should return errors. So, We are trying to standardize metrics because every agency returns its own. And well, OpenAPI v3. OpenAPI v3 is WSDL for REST. And it allows us to publish metadata. It's an initiative under the Linux Foundation. It's a driver for API adoption. As the evolution of Swagger 2, we forbid Swagger 2. You should use OpenAPI v3. This is important because we have so many agencies we couldn't manage asynchronous mismatchings. So it uses a Latin format. You can use generated docs and code using tools. You can have reusable components via hyperlink. For example, if I have a schema defined on my website, you can get it and reuse it. And we provide a set of curated objects are available on GitHub, so you can use them if you start to write services. And this will enable interoperability by reuse. So you don't know about interoperability, but if you use that, it's a good starting point. Some examples. You can use, this is an OpenAPI file. It states that it uses the 3.2 OpenAPI specs. You can use Markdown if you want to describe the APIs. You can make an exhaustive description of your API. You can version it. You can have a title. You can add custom tags. For example, if you want to express a one-liner for your API description, just use the summary. If you want to enforce administration to plan for deprecate or retire of their own API, so you want to enforce administration to have an API life cycle, you can ask them. If you want to enforce them to publish an health check URL of the API, you can do it. You can define schemas. As I told you before, this is a simple given name, family name, and tax code defined in OpenAPI. The nice thing is that once you do it, you put it online, you can reuse it in another API, just with a ref. So for example, I just trust the citizen definition you have on your website, and I define entries, a citizen object with an entries of citizen, and I can use it on responses. I define that my API returns the responses in application JSON using citizen. And this can be even reused by hyperlinks. So for example, I can define an endpoint that gets citizen tax code. It's a get. It calls the getCitizen Python function, and it passes it a tax code variable that is a string defined there. So in the definition YAML. And the response is, again, a citizen object. And now you have understand that it's quite easy. Once you get an OpenAPI specification, you just have to implement one method, and your API is done. You can use anchors to recycle specification parts. In this case, if on every request I want to return those 3 headers, I define them in the throttling headers anchor and just say on every response, give me the headers, and on every replies, get quota headers from database. The user actually is the user of the API, and return the citizen object, the 200 HTTP status code and the throttling headers. And then, again, I've implemented an interoperable API, returning the throttling headers with a very few lines of code. OpenAPI, the nice thing about OpenAPI is that specification that is open. So I joined the technical steering board meetings, and I was able to target the mutual TLS support and a new one-liner info summary field that is quite simple, but it's very important for having your YAML metadata to be used as a catalog metadata. And we're ongoing work on custom security scheme and for supporting, for example, XML schema. That it's not cool stuff, but XML schema is very useful to be to let administration be able to port all the APIs in SOAP and XML to REST. So connection. An OpenAPI framework based on Flask ships a lot of great features and is very useful for sketching APIs. So this is a basic OpenAPI with connection. I define the server URL. I define a status method that calls the getStatus Python function. It returns a problem JSON. And well, on the left, there is the API. The lower part is just running the framework. So you are telling the framework, use simple YAML, that is the file on the left, on the right, to dispatch requests. Use always SSL because we are mandating SSL in our framework. And then whenever you call the /status, it gets a user agent and return a problem JSON object, returning in the detail, hi, for example, Mozilla, Firefox, whatever. So you have an API. You can just use basic out or JWT security. How can you do it? In OpenAPI, you can specify a security scheme that is my basic out, HTTP basic authentication. You can tie your endpoint to a security scheme. So my basic out, you see. And with connection, you can just tie the basic out authentication to a Python function. So you can have different Python functions for different security schemes. And well, this just checks that the username and passwords are equal, but it's clearly a dummy example. And well, at first, if I don't provide credential, it's no authentication authorization token provided 401. And this is done by connection. The second one, you provide clearly, it's not base 64 encoded. And it returns hello world. Easy, right? You can validate requests. There is a part of, for example, here I'm passing a request body that requires a text object. If I don't pass a text object, it complains. You can validate response too. So if the developer writes a code that doesn't validate with the expected schema, JSON schema of OpenAPI, it won't serve it. And well, you can write your own custom validators. All the returning problem, the default errors in connection are JSON problems, but it's always developer responsibility not to expose stack traces or personal data or reserved information. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't do your homework when developing and testing your API, even if connection gives you a lot of help. Another thing you may have noted before is that we standardized logging. And here is a simple example that you can use for sending your log to syslog. Obviously, you should use syslog. Logging at Zulu. So, in this logging YAML, well, at first we are installing the RFC 5424 logging handler module. Then you dict config your logging YAML, that is simple Python logging, standard Python logging YAML configuration file. This says that the root logger uses the RFC 5424 logger handler. The handler uses this class, okay, from this module, and we say, please send me the logs in UTC timestamp, and use the syslog formatter that I defined before. And so I get logs in UTC, so that when we have a delete saving time change, the logs are always monotonically incremental. That is a great feature if you are looking for something. Well, references. New, ongoing Italian framework. Those are the links. You can see a lot of posts on Forum Italia. The posts are in Italian and in English, because we use our posts to communicate with partner members of the European Union. And, well, I think I'm done. I've been fast, right? Okay, thank you very much. And, well, all these have been delivered to you by the Italian government.
If you have any questions, now it's time. So raise your hand. If you
Is there one question?
You talked about JWT and OEDC Connect authentication for the end users. How does it go with the SPID?
Okay, this is not a very technical question. In Italy, we have its name SPID, SPID for our Italian. It's digital identification service from Italy, and it has many siblings in Europe, and it integrates with a regulation that is named EIDAS, that is the European regulation about digital identities. Actually, the SPID works with SAML, but we are working on an OpenID Connect profile. It's just a matter of time of getting all the feedbacks from all agencies. As I was saying, we are 60 million people. There are a lot of agencies, and every technology that we are going to add in our ecosystem should be carefully planned and should be, there is a lot of work for tying, for getting feedbacks for all agencies, but we are working in Italy on an OpenID Connect profile for SPID. So in the future, we will have it. I'm not on that work group, so I cannot say, but you can ask in the forum, or a lot of those processes are actually in the open. So if you start listening on the our Slack developers Italia, you can ask there. You can follow the development of the frameworks, of the guidelines, and probably could even get some information on that. And or if you want to provide some feedbacks, you can just ask them. They are likely to answer you.
Hi. You said about schemas and to maintain the SOAP services. My question is about if the schemas, XSD schemas evolve with the new structure, and so the SOAP services with the maintain aligned with the new REST services, or it's only for
well, the task for me is quite different. We give enablers to administration to provide service to citizen. The point is that. So the question about XML is that despite SOAP, you have many XML objects that you have, for example, to maintain for backward compatibility or for legacy and legal reasons for at least 10 years. And so if I want an agency to provide a new REST service that should, for example, maintain invoice data that are standardized in XML or XML schema, I should be able for it to provide, for example, a CRUD service that can manage consistently and safely XML schema object. That doesn't mean it's SOAP. Okay, it's XML schema. I don't know if I answered. Okay.
Hi, thanks for the great talk.
Oh,
I want
okay,
to know if, excuse me, I'm documenting and exposing my APIs with Django and Django REST Framework and OpenAPI Swagger, but Swagger does not expose refs. Okay, isn't there for Flask something that exposes your APIs without doing all that you did by hand?
If you are asking if there is a way to create service code first,
Yes.
that's evil.
Okay.
Okay, because if you are planning to deliver a service to, for example, 1 million people, you should work on the contract. And you should have a framework for asking feedback on the contract. You should be free to write the contract. You shouldn't tie the contract to some framework that is writing it for you. I don't know if I answered.
Okay, but if you use a serializer, I think a serializer is a ref, or not?
What are you serializing?
A serializer is a representation of a person, of
An
a
object.
model.
Okay, an object serializer.
Yes.
Okay, you should have the schema first, and then write your serializer so that it's compliant with the schema.
Okay.
Okay, you shouldn't make a schema without being absolutely sure to have rules about serializing, or depending on the serializing library you're using, because on the other side, they might not have the same framework you are using, and another framework could interpret or serialize things a bit differently. So you should really rely on standardization, and you should push your frameworks to be strictly compliant on standards, and if it doesn't fit your job, you should join standards board to check which is the right way to do it. Because the problem is that you are going to have so many interactions that you shouldn't delegate work on the specification work to framework. You should keep specification simple. You should avoid that a bug in your serializer or in your framework could inhibit interoperability.
Okay.
Because you could not even sustain. You couldn't tell a citizen, for example, that he cannot reserve medical prescription, for example, or in medical intervention, because the serializer had a bug. You should always keep control of the specification, but you should be aware that the specification should be clear and simple.
Okay, thank you.
I think that there is somebody that has to speak.
But
Well, if I am available for talking even after the talk.
yeah, time's up. So.
Thank you very much.